Number 4, which of the following are true about multifamily housing? Choose 3. So I'm just going to read through all of them, and then we'll come back and think about which ones are likely to be associated with multifamily housing. A, each unit should get at least some direct sunlight each day. B, demising walls should be fire rated. C, multifamily structures should be limited to 5 stories or less in case of power outages. D, the best planning will make a series of towers in a garden, thus giving plenty of green space for kids to play. E, providing larger multifamily structures near transit stops will often allow the developer to produce fewer parking spaces. F, if the building is over 3 stories, then radon is not a concern. So, okay, we start looking through these. These are kind of random. There's a series of questions, potential answers here that are about kind of design planning, and there's a series of questions that are a little bit more straightforward, earnest, like should it be fire rated? When I run through, and this is another kind of interesting example one, there are many different examples in NCARB information where there are certain design principles that they expect you to know. And how you would know them is tricky, so it's not always obvious, but one of them is A. So A is absolutely part of this, so I'm going to circle that one. Each unit should get at least some direct sunlight each day. This is not a code. This is not something you are mandated to do. This is just sort of an architect should know that every unit should get at least some sunlight. This is sort of one of those kind of unwritten rules. Would you not be able to build it? Would a code official stop you? No, they're not going to care. But the AIA and NCARB and everybody feels like this is the kind of thing that you should know as an architect. So I'm going to circle A. B, demising walls should be fire rated. In almost every situation of multifamily, there's a couple of exceptions, but they are very, very particular exceptions. The demising walls are fire rated. So what this means is the demising walls means the demise of the unit. It's the wall between 2 different units. There's going to be some regulation that tells us about what those walls need to be. It may not be a full hour, it might only be a half hour fire rated, but it's likely to be an hour, possibly 2 hours, even more in certain situations. So I'm also going to circle B. Oop. Sorry there. All right. And then C, multifamily structures should be limited to 5 stories or less in case of power outages. This is something that's not necessarily a terrible idea, but it's not something that's in the lexicon. It's not an expectation. There are many thousands of multifamily buildings that are 7 stories, 8 stories, 12 stories, 15, up to 88-story type buildings in big downtowns. So that's just not something that is expected. Now, it's not a terrible idea because after all the hurricanes that have been happening, you've seen lots of people when the power goes out, you're elderly, something like that. It's actually potentially a big deal to be able to get in and out of the building if you have to walk up 7 flights of stairs. But it's not necessarily something that would show up on something like the exam. And then D, the towers in the garden. This is a reference to the Corbu plan of the Le Corbusier plan, Paris, and is widely derided as not really usable. It doesn't actually, people don't feel ownership of those green spaces, and so are significantly problematic. There are many thousands of architects who challenge those ideas and say that the high rises are actually great. So it's an open question, but it's definitely not something that would be on the exam where they would think that that was a great idea, doing the towers in the garden where the kids could then play, because the kids would be unsupervised and it would not, the parents would not feel ownership of those garden spaces. So D is no. E, providing larger multifamily structures near transit stops will often allow the developer to produce fewer parking spaces. on that situation, that's absolutely a logical. Now, note how it's written. It's not saying this will happen all the time. It's saying that if you are providing larger multifamily structures near transit stops, that will often be something that will be useful, that the developer will often get to be able to do something beneficial to them, like provide fewer parking spaces. The idea here is you're trying to encourage people to put new housing near transit sites. So there's a whole series of relatively new, I mean, there are some places that had similar things for 20, 30 years, but a lot of it is within the last about 10 years. And it's this idea of these overlay zoning, and this is really referring to this. This is about kind of encouraging smart growth. You might hear that term used on the exam, and the thought here is you don't just want people to be building generally. We have opinions about where we as a city, we as a society have opinions about where development should happen. And by giving incentives for the things we want to happen, to be able to happen, that's a way that we can encourage development where we want it and discourage development where we don't want it. We're not saying no, we're not saying you can't do that. We're saying, yeah, you can do it, but if you do it over here, where the society gets this other benefit of more likely use of public transport, then what we're doing is we're setting up the future to have a cleaner future, a better future, density where we want it, and it's a big advantage. So this particular example is talking about parking spaces, but we could have easily been talking about, let's say you're allowed to build 20 units on a particular size lot of a particular district, but maybe you're within 600 feet of a public transit stop and you're able to add on an extra 10%, which would mean you'd be able to add on 2 more units. Well, that's a big deal to a developer, and that little bit of encouragement is going to densify near the transit stops, but not say no to other people. We're not saying you can't build, we're just doing this overlay zoning, which is encouraging people and discouraging people, encouraging them to do the things we want, discouraging them to do the things that we don't want, which would be putting more housing in places that are farther away from public transit. So this is just one little potential discussion point, but it's an important idea of this idea of the overlay zoning, of the smart growth, where we are seeing things beyond just the zoning code and finding ways to encourage the things that we like, and as a city, getting more benefit out for the future of the constituents. And then so those are the 3 that I would put on.